When it comes to securing our southern border, at least a few border agents have been stepping over the line, ethically speaking, which leaves some Americans living near the border feeling not very secure. Cheryl Atkinson now with our cover story along the border between Arizona and Mexico.
John Ladd owns 14,000 wild acres in southern Arizona, squared up against the Mexican border. It's land that's become extremely valuable for something besides ranching.
Come on, there.
For Mexico's illegal immigrants and drug cartels, it's a golden pathway into the U.S.
The easy part of getting across here is you got 3 miles to walk, and that's it. You get picked up at the highway and you're gone.
5 generations of Ladds have lived here. The family journeyed west over gritty trails and covered wagons in 1894. More than a century later, Ladd watches from his kitchen window as new immigrants, the illegal kind, regularly march across his land, oddly undeterred by the border fence, government surveillance cameras, and border agents patrolling the property.
How many illegal immigrants do you estimate have crossed your property?
I say about 500,000 people have been caught on the ranch.
That's the size of a city.
That's right. And that's what's been caught. That's not what's got through.
The past few years, the sheer number of Mexicans and those of other nationalities caught on his property is down. But Ladd says there's more illegal traffic coming in trucks filled with drugs.
Okay, I'm going to take you to where they've cut the wall 3 different times since February. They set ramps up on top here. Have a ramp going into Mexico, have a ramp coming into here. They drive the loaded trucks over the ramp, get them in, come up and cut all my fences going to the highway.
This recent video from Yuma, Arizona shows how they do it. The vehicle got stuck with its front end in the U.S. and its tail in Mexico. The passengers ran south.
The south side is all controlled by the cartel now, and the cartel has evolved to where they know what they're doing, and there's a lot of money at stake, and Border Patrol is still doing the same thing, deterring and chasing, and we're not deterring anything, and we're not doing very well chasing them.
Ladd has come up with an astonishing theory as to why the battle seems so futile. He believes some of the federal agents entrusted with policing the border are on the take, working with Mexico's drug cartels.
There's a lot of people in a lot of positions that can be tempted. I don't think the general public knows how much money is involved with the people trade and the drug trade. And the bribe money to allow it to keep coming into the U.S. is astronomical.
More than 40,000 U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents guard the nation's borders, and the vast majority are honest. But drug cartels are working harder than ever to infiltrate their ranks.
They're using Cold War-style tactics, money, sex, drugs, to convince officers to work with them and to help get their products and their people across the border.
Special Agent Terry Reed is part of the FBI's ever-expanding operation working to root out corruption.
In 2007, there were only 6 border corruption task forces. Today, there are 24.
One of Reed's areas of responsibility is San Ysidro, California, at the U.S.-Mexico border, the largest land port of entry in the world. It processes 110,000 people a day.
Just a couple of weeks ago, we arrested someone here at the San Ysidro Port of Entry.
An officer on corruption charges?
That's right.
There have been more than just a few bad apples. A new report from the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General lists 358 convictions of Customs and Border Protection employees and their associates since 2004. Complaints of misconduct are up by 77%.
This is our Border Corruption Task Force Wall of Shame.
The case of Officer Michael Gilliland is notorious.
He was a very senior agent. He taught all the new people at the port, but he was also passing loads, many loads, of undocumented illegal aliens through the border.
That's Gilliland allegedly carrying a cash payoff in a bag. He pled guilty to taking $120,000 in bribes to let in hundreds of illegal immigrants. There's also Agent Michael Gonzalez, captured by a police camera loading pot into his vehicle. Agent Marcos Manzano, Jr., caught harboring illegal immigrants in his family's house. And Officer Luis Alarid, that's him walking to his inspection booth. Turns out the FBI had gotten a tip and was watching him off-duty and on the job. Pay special attention to this white minivan he waves on through.
Inside the van are 18 undocumented people, all of them paying upwards of $5,000 to $8,000 per person to a smuggling organization for passage into the United States.
What's the officer's cut, something like that?
Well, we know from interviews with Luis Alarid that he was making $2,000 per person.
So for that load of 18 illegal immigrants, $36,000 into his pocket.
That's right. That's a substantial sum of money for somebody who had only been on the job a few weeks and was probably making somewhere around $60,000 a year.
A search of Alarid's home uncovered $175,000 in cash. Customs and Border Protection officials say they are taking steps to expose and prevent corruption. The agency recently began requiring lie detector tests, but only once upon hiring. Christopher Maston oversees all U.S. ports of entry for the agency, which employs more than 60,000 people.
Is it a hard job to think that everyone who's hired here has to be beyond corruption, that if $10,000 is basically waved in front of their face, they'll be able to say no?
I have to be focused like a laser beam on that vulnerability. It's their dream to have somebody on the inside working for them. It's my responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen.
But investigators say what worries them even more is the serious threat to national security, the fear that terrorists could slip in. A new congressional report finds Mexican cartels are developing growing collaborations with terrorist organizations linked to Iran and Hezbollah. From 2006 to 2011, along the southwest border, the Border Patrol apprehended 1,918 illegal immigrants from 35 countries designated as states that could harm the U.S. with terrorism, which makes this taped confession all the more chilling. The corrupt officer Alarid admits helping smuggle in 100 people.
And nobody that I know of that's been Laden or something. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
The problem is that because no inspection's taking place, they really have no way of knowing what's in the vehicles. They don't know who they're letting into the country. And that unknown is what scares us all.
16 or 17 different types of nationalities have been caught on the ranch that I know about. So why do you want to think something isn't going to happen bad?
On John Ladd's ranch, the steady stream continues, and he worries not only about the cost to his bottom line, but more importantly, to his way of life.
You lock your doors at night, and you got guns laying around, you got guns in the truck. You worry about your mother, your dad, your wife. You want to live like that? I'm a rancher. I don't want to live like that. But it's every day and costs a lot of money, wear and tear, stress. I'm getting to the point I don't have any confidence in our government, our system, or anybody trying to enforce the border.
Investigators will doubtless follow the money to see what financial help the marathon bombers may have received. For some victims of earlier terrorist attacks, the money trail has led them straight into federal court. Cheryl Atkinson has their story.
New York attorney Mark Sokolow managed to escape the World Trade Center in the September 11 attacks. A few months later, feeling lucky to be alive, he took his family on vacation to Israel.
The last day of our trip was Sunday, January 27th.
In a horrible twist of fate, terror was to strike Sokolow for the second time in 4 months.
We heard this just horrific blast. And right away, I knew that it was a bomb. It was probably a suicide bomber.
The Sokolows were shopping in this Jerusalem shoe store when the suicide bomber struck.
I remember spinning around from the force of the bomb, and it seemed like slow motion. I can't believe this is happening to me. I just can't believe it's happening. And I just thought we were going to die.
The suicide bomber killed one other person and injured 150.
Had you seen yourself in the mirror?
Jamie, the Sokolo's youngest, remembers those terrifying moments.
So right when it happened, I knew what was going on.
You were 12.
Yeah.
I looked up, and a little girl was looking down at me, and she was unrecognizable. Her face was just bleeding, and I had no idea if this could possibly be Jamie, but then I realized that it was.
It was a time of death and destruction on the streets of Israel, the Second Intifada, or Palestinian uprising, marked by repeated terror strikes.
I felt the burning sensation of the bullets going into my body.
Eugene and Lorraine Goldstein were visiting Israel for their grandson's wedding in June 2003, when terrorists randomly opened fire on their Volkswagen.
Did you see who had shot you?
I saw two men. I did see them.
Both Lorraine and Eugene had been shot in the head. Their son Howard was driving.
The way his body was weaving back and forth, and I knew that he was gone.
I knew my son was dead, and I was laying there next to my son, and all kinds of things went through my mind. The thought of losing a child and being in that kind of a horrific situation is very overwhelming. It's beyond words. There's not a night, and I tell you this is God's honest truth, I don't think of my son. Every night when I get during the night, I think of him, of just picturing him laying next to me.
The Goldsteins and Sokolos are now part of a group of landmark lawsuits filed in New York federal court. They include 5,000 terror victims globally, several hundred in the U.S. They're using a novel approach to fight back against the enemy that tore apart their lives. They're suing international banks that they say supported the terrorists.
The lawsuits allege that Arab Bank, Credit Lyonnais, and two other foreign banks with New York offices were key to an intricate system that moved cash to aid terrorists and their families. Accounts at Arab Bank allegedly were used to pay cash rewards to families of suicide bombers and other so-called Palestinian martyrs. Records show money was supplied by two groups on the U.S. list of foreign terrorist organizations, Hezbollah and Hamas. The terrorist who attacked Mark's family was Wafa Idris, the first female suicide bomber in the conflict.
The family of Wafa Idris presented documentation to Arab Bank showing that they are the family of the woman who committed this attack. And as soon as the bank was satisfied, they made a payment to the family of the equivalent of $5,316.
The payment was supposedly for what?
To compensate the family for loss of a wage earner, for example. Their families probably are adversely affected in a financial way due to their loss of life, but they were suicide bombers. They were terrorists.
The suit alleges that a charity called the Saudi Committee for the Support of the Intifada al-Quds organized millions of dollars in payments from Hamas.
Have you been surprised by how formalized this network was?
Yeah, I could not believe it. It turns out that there was a whole system in place. The Saudi Committee would provide lists of terrorists and their families, all sorts of information to the bank. The Saudi Committee would advertise throughout the West Bank and Gaza and other areas that if you want to contribute funds to help the families of suicide bombers, you can do so by sending us money via the network of bank branches of Arab Bank and perhaps others. It's just shocking to read this. And it was done out in the open. It was done on public websites. It wasn't something that they hid.
None of the banks would talk on camera. They say they merely conducted routine banking activities not intended to promote terror. Credit Lyonnais calls the allegations baseless and absurd. Arab Bank says it abhors terrorism. It reportedly admits transferring $90 million in what it calls humanitarian aid to Palestinians, but says there was no conspiracy to subsidize suicide bombers.
Based on my experience both at Treasury and at the NSC.
CBS News analyst Juan Zarate was the Treasury Department's Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing under President George W. Bush.
How big of a deal is this case?
I think this is a set of cases that are incredibly important not just for the banking community, but also for the counterterrorism world, because it potentially sends a chilling signal to banks around the world that they run the risk of financial and legal liability if they're doing business with terrorist actors.
The bank may say, we didn't know what they were doing. We're simply doing business with a customer.
They knew. They had to know. They could not be in business if they didn't know. They didn't become bankers of that magnitude with being stupid. The money that's funneled there to commit terrorism in that part of the world can just as well be done to promote terrorism in this country and finance terrorism in this country. So they have to be stopped.
Terrorists and terrorist organizations need funding, like any other organization. It should be important to every American to try to put an end to the funding of terrorism, which we've all seen can actually happen on American soil as well.